DW Living Planet with Sam Baker.
Welcome to Living Planet. Today, we've got plastics on the brain, and in particular, those pervasive single-use plastics. This is because a partial ban of these items comes into force this weekend here in Europe. But will this make a big difference in our shops and grocery stores? And more importantly, will it make a difference for the environment?
If you would ban all the single-use plastics in general, of course, this would be a very big impact. But here it's just a very limited amount of plastic items which are banned.
We also hear from an activist in Malawi who helped bring in that country's plastic ban 2 years ago.
And I really look forward to the day when we're going to say, do you remember when we had those little blue plastics? It was so horrible, because I can definitely see that day coming. And I think it's just a matter of time.
And with all of these bans, does that mean we're on the way to a plastic-free future?
The trajectory is pretty clear. We're not on track as a global society to start producing less plastic. On the contrary, we're on track to produce a whole lot more.
Stay tuned for all that here on Living Planet. Along with the rest of the European Union, Germany is starting to ban certain single-use plastic products in an effort to better manage its plastic consumption. But Europe's biggest economy produces more than 6 million tons of plastic waste annually, as many Germans continue to embrace a lifestyle of throwaway culture. So will it really make the impact that environmentalists in Germany are hoping for? Natalie Carney has more from Munich.
Well, I've just been to the supermarket in an attempt to see if it was possible to buy what I needed in non-plastic packaging. Overall, it was not. I mean, we do need plastic for some things, such as my toothpaste here. But many of the other items did come in plastic wrapping I really don't think are that necessary, such as these carrots here, for instance. And these apples. I mean, when did we start packaging our fruits and vegetables? So I'm curious to see how much of this plastic will still be on the shelves once Germany starts to ban some single-use plastics.
Germany is a good starting point, as the country produces more plastic waste than any other country in the European Union. And according to many different studies, close to half of all that waste is from consumer packaging. In fact, upwards of 20% of the trash collected in our parks and other public spaces across Germany consists of single-use plastics. More takeaways, more ready-made meals, the ease this packaging brings our lives has led to a 50% increase in plastic waste over the last 15 years. And much of that thrown into the recycling bins in the Munich area ends up here at the Remondis dump north of the city.
The packaging industry...
Klaus Thellmann is the site's coordinator.
We're in front of a huge mound of garbage from the municipality of Munich. Is it? How much plastic do you collect here?
We collect about 8,400 tons per year of this packaging. So we are normally about in Germany 30 kilos per citizen a year. It goes to the burning plants or the recycling process, but nothing on landfill. We don't have a landfill for such waste. It's not allowed anymore in Germany.
On average, Germans generate around 6.3 million tons of consumer plastic waste annually, but arguably only about 30 to 40% of it is collected to be recycled. And how much of that actually gets recycled, well, that's anyone's guess. The Europe-wide ban on some single-use plastics is an attempt to reduce our plastic consumption. Items such as single-use plastic bags, cutlery, plates, stir sticks, drinking straws, cotton swabs, as well as polystyrene cups and boxes, which many takeaway meals come in, are all on the list and seen as part of our throwaway culture.
I try to avoid takeaway food and takeaway delivery.
Many residents, such as Brian Johnson and Peter Kloen, agree with the ban.
Well, I think there's a lot of unnecessary packaging. We never used to have it. It's become too easy for us just to be a disposable, consumable society. You see so much of it lying around, and that's not pleasant. It can only be for the good.
As less plastic is used, the better it is. I like this idea. Planet needs to go greener.
Yet, how many of these items are even still available? For instance, many people bring their own bags for shopping, and I've not seen a plastic fork in years.
So I'm here at one of the grocery stores in Munich to see if I can come across any single-use plastic items on the ban list that are still on the shelves. There we got some paper plates, some paper cutlery, cups, but there does not seem to be any plastic ones here. No, none here. All right, let's go see what I can find at another store. Okay, here I'm seeing a brand of children's cotton ear swabs, and they seem to have a plastic stem between the cotton. So I believe this item will likely no longer be here on the shelf next month. Okay, I'm going to try one more store. All right, no plastic plates, cups, or cutlery here. And one of the women working here that I spoke to said they hadn't actually stocked such items for quite a while.
So with many of the to-be banned items already off the shelves and many others not even on the list, the real question is, what will be the true impact of the ban?
This is definitely a good thing, but...
I put that question to Philipp Sommer. He's the deputy head of the Department of Circular Economy at the Environmental Action Group here in Germany.
If you would ban all the single-use plastics in general, of course, this would be a very big impact. But here it's just a very limited amount of plastic items which are banned. All of these things like plastic coffee capsules or vegetable packaging in the supermarket, cheese packaging and so on, this all will remain on the shelves.
So the solution?
We should reduce our plastic consumption without shifting to other materials. So, for instance, if you had plastic plate before, now it's a paper plate. And the level of environmental impact is still similar high. And the consumption is not reduced. So what we need is a real incentive to promote these reusable solutions. And we need to make new plastic consumption and single-use plastics more expensive, for instance, with a levy.
Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to bash plastics. After all, we need plastics.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So
Josef Ard is the head of Polymor, an online trading platform for sustainable plastics, and agrees with the ethos of the ban.
in my opinion, it increases sensitivity for the whole topic, for reusing things, because plastic, it's not bad. Plastic is lightweight. Plastic saves us CO2 and environmental pollution by weight you transport and things like that. Medicine, it saves life at the end of the day. But the key is we have to collect it, we have to sort it, and we have to reuse it.
It also comes down to rethinking our own personal plastic usage. For instance, grocery stores now offer netted reusable material bags for your fruits and vegetables, and metal reusable straws you can throw in the dishwasher come in cute little pouches. These are just some alternative options. But a significant change to our habits will take time, Thilman tells me, back at the rubbish dump.
It's a process on the thinking of people. Then it's going less and less and less, but you cannot say from one day to another day, stop it.
Germany's new regulation is expected to take effect on the 3rd of July, but it's not expected to stop there. Products made of so-called oxo-degradable plastics will also be banned in the future. These are substances made of traditional plastic and bioadditives that are not biodegradable or compostable, as the plastic elements remain long after the bioadditives have broken down. Germany's efforts may be considered meager by some, but they are in line with the European Commission's work to make all plastic packaging placed on the EU market either reusable or recyclable in a cost-effective manner by 2030. Natalie Carney, DW, Munich.
My next guest is no stranger to bans on plastic. In fact, she helped enact Malawi's ban on so-called thin plastics, things like plastic bags, for instance, and that was 2 years ago. Gloria Majiga Kamoto works for the Center for Environmental Policy and Advocacy, and she recently was awarded the 2021 Goldman Environmental Prize for Africa. This was in honor of her work galvanizing public pressure on Malawi's High Court to uphold the ban on plastics, which was originally introduced in 2015. In Malawi, single-use plastics account for 80% of the 75,000 tons of plastic produced there. These super thin plastics clog drainage systems and litter the streets, actually making the effects of flooding worse and serving as breeding grounds for mosquitoes that can carry malaria. I recently spoke with Gloria Majiga Kamoto about the campaign to ban these plastics, and I started out by asking her why she got involved in this work.
I think one of the areas that really got my interest is the impact that plastic pollution had on livestock. So we had a project and had farmers receiving goats, and we had some of them lose their goats because they had ingested the plastics, because they're pretty much everywhere. And so I think at that point, I felt like there was more that we could do.
Now, the ban that was meant to take effect in 2016 was temporarily blocked by an injunction obtained by plastics manufacturers in Malawi. Gloria went on to tell me about the argument these companies presented for plastics and how she and fellow environmental activists countered that line of reasoning.
They said that they were providing jobs, and so they raised the fact that families would be affected by the loss of jobs, and the fact that they were also contributing economically through taxes and, just the fact that they're an economic entity. But one of our strongest standpoints was that even just the cost of cleaning up, it would still be a burden to the 17 million people who still have to pay taxes and therefore have to provide for the maintenance or rehabilitation of our environment. It doesn't make economic sense.
And you got some of these farmers involved too, right? Who were seeing these plastic pieces inside of their goats, basically?
Yeah, so that was a very important part of the campaign. So when we formed a group, we would share pictures with each other of these areas that were polluted and would share them around in groups and just show people just how bad the impacts were. And then we also got these farmers who had been affected, and we had them engaging with policymakers. We showed these images and just tried to demonstrate to people just how much the plastics were impacting not just the environment, but people's livelihoods. And farmers are basically the backbone of our economy. So it was really important to share those stories and those experiences and put a human face to it.
And so the courts finally put this regulation into law in 2019. What do you think was the final motivating factor to bring in this plastics ban?
Just before the court ruling, first of all, we had joined in the case, but we also said that we would emphasize and show the courts that they are making a very important decision. So we had organized a march to the courts, and just a day before, I think at this point it was pretty clear that people are interested to see what the courts are going to do, and people are watching. And I think that was really important to show that we're also looking at the courts and say that you also have a responsibility towards our environment.
The actual rule, so what it says is it bans the production, importation, distribution, and use of thin plastics. So these are those single-use plastics, right? Which you can't really get away from it feels like.
Yeah, and every time you get close to the place where there's economic activity, you just be greeted by this sea of blue, and it's just so much plastic. So it's pretty much everywhere. But it's because they're so cheap and so accessible, and people don't really have a sense of responsibility. They don't even have a lot of options on what to do with them when they're done using them. So they've sort of just resolved to putting them back into the environment.
Since this ban went into place 2 years ago, have you seen a noticeable difference? I mean, when you look at shops or stalls, is there a lot less plastic?
In the last few years, a lot of our work has focused on getting people to be aware of the fact that, first of all, the plastics that they're using are bad. And a lot of engagements have informed them that if you continue to purchase these plastics, you will lose money because they will be confiscated from you. And companies at some point were being shut down, but because of the judicial review, that was delayed. So to be honest, we haven't really seen a reduction in the plastics in the environment. But what I have seen is an increased awareness by people because they know that there's a ban, they know that something is happening and that something is coming. And I think that's a very important aspect in making the ban work. Within the next year, I can foresee that we won't even see any plastics on the market because people are so aware that they should not be there.
Yeah, and I'm curious, what are the consequences for having plastic bags in your store or using these types of plastics? I mean, what do people face?
So for companies, they get instantly shut down and all the products are confiscated.
So these are companies that are producing products in plastic already.
Yes. So far, government has only been targeting producers because the idea is to kill off the supply completely. And once that is killed off, then we can get into the consumers and changing consumer patterns.
Got it. So how difficult overall do you think it will be to enact and enforce this ban?
It's something that people have known is coming for quite a long time. So I think it is going to be well received. The Goldman Prize has also honestly been, I think, something that has really put a lot of light on what's happening. I think one of the most amazing things that I have seen since the prize was announced is people saying, oh, I want to do something different, or how can I join in this, and what can I do? I want to stop using plastics too. And I really look forward to the day when we're going to say, do you remember when we had those little blue plastics? It was so horrible, because I can definitely see that day coming. And I think it's just a matter of time.
Europe is about to ban certain single-use plastics. And I'm just curious what you think Europe and other parts of the world can learn from Malawi's plastic ban and your experiences there.
I think that for me, I would really emphasize that they need to start looking at even a ban of all plastics. I think they already need to start thinking about technologies that, look at sustainable packaging, because that's sort of where we also look to, because as of now, we don't have those technologies. So in as much as they're looking into banning single-use plastics now, I think there should already be a long-term plan in how the world can transition from plastic packaging and start looking for more sustainable options. We're willing to learn from that, and we're willing to look at how the world can come together as a global village and form these circular economies where we're not just generating waste.
And I'm just curious, on an individual level, have you been able to completely eliminate plastics in your life, or are there still some you're struggling to not have in your day-to-day life anymore?
There's a lot of plastic that I struggle with, Sam. The problem is having options, and I completely understand that for a lot of people that is the struggle. But I also have taken very active steps in my own life to eliminate plastics that I don't need, and that takes a lot of awareness. It's not easy, but having options would also make it much, much easier. And that's something that I'm very much looking forward to advocating for, to see how we can bring in these new options that are very much sustainable but also easily accessible to everybody.
For our listeners who live in places that do not have plastic bans yet, or are just trying to cut down on their own plastic use, do you have any tips for the easiest things you can cut out of your life?
It's really simple things. It's things like just my water bottle, just having a water bottle that you use all the time and you just get to refill. And especially the part of polluting, now putting back the waste into the environment. Everybody always says my car is just so messy, because I'd rather go around with my trash and dispose of it correctly than for me to dispose of it anywhere. So those are just little things in your daily routine that you sort of think about and then you change. It's also about you taking initiative to talk to people, because you are a consumer and you have a lot of power. You're also someone who policymakers are interested in, because you hold the power to vote and your voice matters. I think we can do so much better in terms of reducing our part of the mess.
That was Gloria Majiga Komoto, the 2021 Goldman Environmental Prize winner for Africa. While these bans may discourage plastic use and even production, other forces at play are driving a growing plastics industry. As we mentioned last week on the show, fossil fuel companies are looking for additional revenue streams as people turn to renewable energy and electric vehicles and away from oil. And one option they see is producing more plastic. To get a better grasp of the economic pressures at play in the plastics industry, as well as examining the enormity of single-use plastics footprint, a few of my DW colleagues recently followed the life cycle of one small piece of single-use plastic. They explored how it fits into this bigger global industry of plastics. Joining me to share this reporting is my DW colleague, Tamsin Walker. Welcome to Living Planet, Tamsin.
Thank you. Hi, Sam.
So, as part of your reporting, you followed the life of a shampoo sachet, a little plastic packet or wrapper of shampoo, a single-use item. Can you tell me a little bit about the life cycle of this item and why such a small piece of packaging matters in the grand scheme of things?
So, when you hold a sachet and it may come to you filled with tomato ketchup or with some cosmetic product, or in some parts of the world with other hygiene products, toothpaste, for example, washing powder. These things, they're so small and they are so insignificant. And it's really, I find it very interesting that something that small can have such an impact. Because of course, I mean, just like any other piece of plastic, it has to start somewhere, and it starts its life under the ground in the form of oil or gas. And it's extracted from the ground. It is processed in various different stages to be made into the building blocks for plastic products. And plastic products are then made from it. They're then shipped all over the world. And in the case of these sachets, they are then used, and they are very hard and often not impossible to recycle. Where there is no waste management system that can deal with them, then they end up littering the streets. They can become a breeding ground for disease.
And that's compared to something like a plastic bottle that this could be in, or even a glass bottle, getting away from plastics. I mean, what sort of alternative should people be thinking about instead of these types of single-use plastics?
Well, I mean, the thing with the sachets, right, and this is very specific to the sachets, is that they are made to cater for people on low income, particularly in some parts of Asia. They're a big business. And people don't necessarily have the money to buy a bottle of shampoo, but they can afford to buy sachets of shampoo. An alternative would be to have different systems in place that people are able to buy small portions of products but put it in their own vessels. And that these products just need to be designed with their end in mind. When we're faced with such a huge pollution problem, a huge plastic pollution problem, then I think the answer, or at least one of the answers, is to factor that problem in at the design stage.
And this is something that has been met with resistance from these companies that produce these products, right? So as part of your reporting, you covered this group called the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. Can you tell me a bit more about this group and their aims?
Yeah, so they set up in 2019 with a $1.5 billion budget to fight plastic waste. And it's an alliance, as the name suggests, of, I think there are now 80 members from what they say right across the plastic value chain. So there are companies involved that are from the extractive industries, there are petrochemical companies, there are consumer goods companies, there are packaging companies. I mean, there's a very broad range of big name organizations that are involved in this. Their main objective is to remove plastic from the environment. But the way that they're focusing on doing that, not exclusively, but their main focus is on waste management. And that includes recycling, just pulling the waste out of the environment and finding a way to use it.
Which has historically been an issue. I mean, we don't actually recycle much of what people throw into recycling bins.
No, I think 9% of plastic ever produced has been recycled so far. And there is a good bit of criticism against this alliance because, in essence, you have a lot of companies that are involved in creating the plastic who are also working with this alliance to remove it from the environment, but it is not their stated aim to reduce the amount of plastic that is being manufactured in the first place.
Even from when recycling first began, I mean, this was kind of part of the purpose, is putting this onus of what to do with the final packaging or product onto the consumer so that companies didn't have to come up with a way to dispose of that product at the end.
Yeah, and you will find one of the refrains coming from the anti-plastic camp is that we cannot recycle our way out of this crisis. There's just too much of it. And the trajectory is pretty clear. We're not on track as a global society to start producing less plastic. On the contrary, we're on track to produce a whole lot more.
So I'm looking at the website for the Alliance to End Plastic Waste and some of its members, which include companies like PepsiCo, Procter & Gamble, but also quite a few oil companies, ExxonMobil, Total, Shell. And as we heard last week on the show, oil companies are on increasingly shaky ground, particularly as people move towards renewables and electric vehicles. But does this increased production of plastic as a different revenue stream need to be a bigger environmental issue? Is this something that investors should be asking about more often?
Plastic does offer some kind of a lifeline for these oil and gas companies. We know that the world is in the midst of a plastic pollution crisis, but there isn't a huge amount of exposure of all the players that are involved in that. And just connecting, joining the dots between the shaky ground upon which oil and, to a lesser degree, gas companies now stand, with sachets that end up washed up on the shore or blocking a drain somewhere in the Philippines, is a very important thing to do. It's a complex issue because there are so many different big industries involved. But I think it's something that needs to be made very clear so that people, we as consumers or investors, are in full possession of the facts and of the production chain and can make their choices based on knowledge.
Also on this list, I'm looking at the partners of this group, which include organizations like USAID, GIZ, which is kind of Germany's equivalent Sustainable Development Initiative, UN Habitat. I mean, does this signal that there's a role for voters and citizens to play, not just consumers and investors?
I would agree with that, but I think that in order for voters and citizens to speak up, then they first need to know that the problem exists, and they need to know that there's a lot of big industrial power goes into making very tiny pieces of plastic that hold enough to wash your hair once. That equation, I think, is so interesting, that you have these products which serve such a fleeting purpose, but they are helping to prop up these huge, wealthy industries. And when you think about these very small products like sachets, like I say, they start life deep under the ground, and they travel an awful long way and go through very many different incarnations to become this tiny little multi-layered packet with a squirt of shampoo in it. And they serve a very brief purpose. Then they continue to live on. And interestingly, with the sachets, nobody has actually been able, or nobody that I've managed to speak to has been able to tell me how long it takes for them to break down. And I sometimes think, if we just stick with the thought of the sachet, that after it's been used to wash, let's say, a family's hair, that quite conceivably that piece of plastic or those layers of plastic in this little package will still be out there somewhere when the people who were having their hair washed as kids are old and grey, or when they have departed this life altogether. It will still be there somewhere. And these are the things that I think, when you're talking about citizens and electorates, this is the kind of information that I think people should be in possession of in order to be able to make their choices.
Well, thanks for sharing this reporting with us, Tamsin.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
To check out this special report on plastics out this Friday, visit dw.com/plastic. Thanks this week to our studio team, Ileana Ghilarducci and Thomas Schmidt. I'm Sam Baker. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with more environment stories from around the globe.